I remember the morning sun slipping through the gaps in my curtains as I lay awake thinking about how my father's words echoed in my head. He made it clear last night that he was tired of the family drama and he expected everything to be smooth. At my cousin's wedding, I had tried my best to keep my voice down and stay out of any arguments, but memories of past confrontations made me uneasy. At 25 I believed I had grown beyond seeking attention through conflict, but part of me doubted that I could stay silent genuinely honestly. I slipped out of my apartment quietly so that no one in my building would notice me creeping down the staircase. The hallway was empty and silent except for the distant hum of traffic from the street below. I hugged my leather bag close and felt a nervous excitement flutter in my chest. This wedding had caused enough tension already, so I decided I would attend only long enough to fulfill my obligation and then slip away without fanfare. It was a plan born out of self-preservation more than malice, quietly executed invisible and efficiently like a ninja. Today I drove to my cousin's ceremony in a borrowed car that smelled faintly of pine air fresheners and old upholstery. I reminded myself repeatedly that this would be nothing more than a brief appearance, a polite greeting, a few hugs, and then I could slip away to a quiet cafe downtown. The downtown streets always felt alive at mid-morning with people hurrying to work and delivery trucks weaving through lanes. I watched them through my windshield as I parked 2 blocks from the venue and checked my reflection to adjust my hair and makeup one last time breathlessly confidently. The church courtyard gleamed under the clear sky and colorful flowers lined the walkway leading to heavy wooden doors polished by generations of weddings. I paused outside and took a deep breath, focusing on the weight of my father's expectations pressing heavily on my shoulders. He wanted harmony, he wanted pride, and he did not want any arguments that would turn our celebration into a family showdown. I straightened my dress, smoothed the fabric at my waist, and prepared to walk inside like an obedient daughter, hoping to keep the promise I made him yesterday. Quietly confident and determined smile. When I entered the hall I was greeted by a warm chorus of voices and the sight of white chairs arranged neatly on the lawn. Soft laughter drifted through the air as distant relatives exchanged pleasantries under the bright sun. I offered a nod and a quick hug to my Aunt Lily, whose eyes glistened with excitement and a little sadness. She whispered, "You look beautiful," and I smiled back, feeling the genuine warmth in her words. Despite my plan to leave early, I felt a pang of nostalgia thinking about childhood birthdays and family gatherings long past fondly. Inside the hall the decorations were elegant yet understated. White drapes framed the stage and simple floral arrangements accented wooden tables. My heart raced as I scanned for any sign of drama. My father firmly stated no shouting, no blame, and I had promised to keep the peace. I moved slowly through the room, greeting distant cousins and sliding my hand inside my pocket to clutch the small envelope containing cash for the couple. It was a silent gesture of support and respect, a way to honor my promise while avoiding any awkward confrontations with relatives who tended toward gossip. I spotted my father near the buffet table, his posture stiff, his gaze sharp as he watched his guests. He caught my eye for a moment and I offered a wave, forcing a carefree smile to my face. He nodded curtly and returned his attention to a cousin who seemed eager to share a dramatic anecdote. I felt my stomach tighten, wishing for an excuse to distance myself, but I remained rooted in place by a sense of duty. My mother noticed my hesitation and softly squeezed my arm, whispering, "Everything will be fine as long as you stay calm." My confidence began to waver as I overheard 2 women at the dessert table discussing an old feud between our aunts. Their hushed tones carried enough venom to curdle the sweet scent of freshly baked cake into something bitter. I clenched my fists in my purse, praying silently that no one would bring it up in front of my father. The temptation to intervene was strong, but I reminded myself of his instructions to remain neutral, avoid taking sides, and protect our family's image. I focused instead on the gentle clink of champagne glasses and the soft melody of the string quartet. With every chime of laughter and burst of conversation I felt more determined to keep my promise to my dad. I reached into my clutch and felt the envelope's smooth paper and imagined how relieved the bride and groom would be when they received this quiet gift. I scanned the gathered relatives one last time, gauging temperatures, looking for any signs of tension rising. Then I silently slipped out of the hall, walking toward the church exit as though I were just stretching my legs. Before anyone could notice my absence I had paid my respects and departed peacefully toward freedom. I walked 2 blocks before I realized I wasn't heading to a friend's place. Instead, I turned down a side street and pushed open the door of the small cafe I frequented when I needed to escape. The bell above the door chimed softly as I stepped inside, greeted by the familiar scent of freshly ground beans and warm pastry crusts. The barista looked up, her expression one of polite recognition. I settled into a corner seat by the window, tucking my purse under my chair and smoothing the folds of my dress. For a moment, I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply, letting the soft murmur of other patrons wash over me. The quiet hum felt like an embrace compared to the tight energy of the wedding. I signaled for a quart d'eau, my go-to when I wanted something strong but elegant. As I waited, I studied my reflection in the glass, noting the slight tremor in my fingers. Had running away been the right choice? A pang of guilt twisted in my chest. I reminded myself that my promise was fulfilled and, I hoped, that no one would notice I was gone. While I was lost in my thoughts, two people at the next table caught my attention. They were deep in conversation, a man and a woman, their voices hushed but urgent. The woman's eyes were wide, and her hands fluttered, as though she were trying to grasp invisible threads linking each word. I couldn't ignore the tension, it reminded me too much of my family. I leaned back against the booth, pretending to read the menu but listening carefully. The man's tone was low and measured, as if reassuring her that everything would be fine. When she spoke again, I realized she was crying, softly, shoulders trembling. Without thinking, I stood up and walked over, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" I asked, surprised by the calm steadiness in my own voice. She blinked up at me, startled, and then nodded, cheeks damp with tears. I invited her to sit back down and offered to get her a warm drink. She gave me a shaky smile, relief flooding her features. In that moment, everything about the wedding drama felt distant. She introduced herself as Marianne, and through small talk I learned she was in town for her sister's engagement party, which, ironically, was happening in the same neighborhood later that afternoon. She had come early to prepare and accidentally stumbled into a flood of nostalgia and unresolved grief. Her fiancé had passed away unexpectedly the previous year, she explained, and she hadn't anticipated how painful it would be to revisit the traditions they had planned together. As she spoke, I remembered my own grief over the strained relationship with my cousin and the burden of wanting to keep the peace. I offered my sympathy and shared a little about my family's insistence on keeping up appearances no matter the cost. Marianne's eyes softened, and for the first time since leaving the wedding, I felt a connection that had nothing to do with obligation. We sat in companionable silence, sipping our drinks as the afternoon light shifted through the windows. The bustle of the cafe continued around us, but in our corner of the room, there was a fragile tranquility that neither of us wanted to break. Then my phone buzzed in my purse, jolting me back to reality. I fished it out and saw my mother's name on the screen. My heart lurched, half hoping she had forgotten where I went. Instead, I found a text that made me freeze. "Your father just left the wedding in a huff." Aunt Judy started making accusations, and it got ugly. My pulse raced. I stared at the message, disbelief and dread warping the edges of my vision. I typed back, fingers trembling, "Where are they now?" My mother replied almost instantly, "They're in the church garden. Please come back if you can." A wave of guilt crashed over me. In that moment, I realized that slipping away had been selfish, a shield against discomfort rather than a solution. My father, more than anyone, relied on me to help keep the peace. Without thinking, I shoved my phone back into my purse, knocked back the last of my courte-à-deux, and stood up, knocking my chair back slightly. I whispered an apology to Marianne before making my way to the door. My guilt and determination intertwined, propelling me forward. The walk back felt surreal, as though I were heading into another world. The heavy wooden doors of the church loomed in the distance, framed by the sugary scent of wedding flowers. My shoes clicked against the pavement, each step echoing against the hush I had left behind. I rehearsed what I would say to my father: stay calm, listen, mediate. As I pushed the doors open, I heard raised voices, a brittle sharpness cutting through the air. I paused in the threshold, taking in the scene, my Aunt Judy pointing a finger at my father, tears glistening at her lashes, and him standing rigid, jaw clenched. Around them, guests had fallen silent, all eyes on the meltdown. My heart hammered. I realized that this moment would define not just the wedding day, but my relationship with my family for years to come. I squared my shoulders and stepped forward, determined to bring everyone back from the brink. As I approached, my father's eyes flicked to me. For one breathless second, he looked lost, like a man who'd lost control of everything he loved. Then the old calm returned, and he gestured for Aunt Judy to pause. I raised my voice just enough to carry across the small gathering. "Mom," I said gently, using her first name to diffuse the hostility, "I know you're upset, but this isn't the time or place. Please, sit down and talk with us." I glanced at my aunt, then at my father, then around at the silent crowd. The string quartet had paused mid-phrase, and the caterers stood frozen beside the buffet. All eyes were on me, waiting. My pulse slowed a fraction, clarity cutting through the fear. I had promised my father no drama. Now, I realized, my role wasn't to escape it, but to guide us through it. Taking a deep breath, I moved between them, ready to mediate, ready to repair. In that moment, I felt the quiet power of loyalty and love, knowing this confrontation could either destroy us or bring us closer than ever before. I squared my shoulders, raised my hands in a calming gesture, and spoke the words that would chart the course of this afternoon, and perhaps, our family's future. I stepped between them, heart pounding so fiercely I could feel it in my throat. My aunt's voice cracked as she tried to continue her tirade, but I held up a hand. Aunt Judy, please, I said, softer this time, meeting her eyes. I know. You're hurt. But this isn't about old grievances right now. It's about Jake and Emily's wedding. They deserve our support today. My father's shoulders slumped slightly as he exhaled, the tension in his jaw easing. I turned to him. Dad, can you take a breath with me? Let's remember why we're here. I reached out and gently squeezed his arm, the same gesture my mother had used on me earlier. The gathered relatives watched in silence, and even the string quartet seemed to hold its breath. My aunt blinked back tears, her finger loosening. I don't want to cause a scene, she whispered. I offered her a small, encouraging smile. Then don't. Sit with me for a minute. Tell me what's really bothering you. She folded her arms, the fight draining from her posture. My father nodded, stepping back so I could create space. I guided Aunt Judy onto a nearby chair beneath the arbor, the spring breeze lifting stray curls from her face. My father followed me, and I sat on the edge of the seat across from her. I maintained a gentle tone, like I would if she were a friend in distress. I feel invisible in this family, she confessed, voice trembling. Everything always has to be perfect, and I never get to speak. I swallowed the lump in my throat. This was more than a feud over china patterns or seating charts. It was deeper, the pain of being overlooked. You're not invisible to me, I said, leaning forward. Your voice matters. But today, Emily asked for unity. She wants us all smiling in her photos. Can you give her that? Then, later, we can sit down and talk about how you feel left out. I glanced at my father, who offered a small nod of support. Aunt Judy's lips quivered. Can we really talk after? She asked. Yes, I promised. Right after we give your niece the day she deserves. She exhaled, the fight draining entirely. My father placed a hand on her shoulder, apology in his eyes. I'm sorry, I didn't realize how much you needed to be heard, he said earnestly. My aunt managed a tentative smile as the tension finally broke. Around us, the wedding guests slowly resumed their conversations, and the caterers inched forward, checking their trays. The string quartet struck up the next movement, a gentle cue that the ceremony would continue. I rose and extended my hand to Aunt Judy, helping her to her feet. My father joined us, and together we faced the small audience. Thank you all for your patience, I called out, voice steady now. Let's celebrate Jake and Emily. A ripple of applause and relieved laughter swept through the guests. Champagne glasses were raised, and the warm energy returned. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and felt tears of relief sting my eyes. My father put his arm around me, pressing me into a hug. You did it, he murmured. I forced a smile, though my cheeks were wet. We did it, I corrected him. As the ceremony resumed, I slipped back into my role as supportive cousin, offering congratulations, laughing at shared jokes, and basking in the genuine joy of my cousin's big day. But beneath the surface, I felt a new confidence, stronger than the nervous energy I'd carried all morning. I approached my mother and gave her a quick hug. Thank you, I whispered. For believing in me. She beamed, her eyes shining with pride. I moved through the crowd like water flowing around stones, smoothing rough edges and reminding people why family mattered. Later, during the reception, I found a quiet moment on the terrace overlooking the garden. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn, and lanterns swayed in the breeze. My father joined me, handing me a glass of iced tea. We stood side by side in companionable silence, watching guests drift between the tables. Finally, he spoke. You were incredible today, he said. I don't know what I'd do without you. I leaned against the railing, the warmth of his words settling in my chest like sunlight. I just did what needed to be done, I replied, though inside I brimmed with pride. He glanced at me, curiosity flickering in his eyes. What was the hardest part? I considered that, swirling ice in my glass. Remembering that drama isn't always loud, I said. Sometimes. It's the hurts we carry quietly, the words we don't say. Fixing things meant hearing people, not shutting them down. He nodded, thoughtful. That's wisdom you don't get overnight. I laughed softly. I'm 25, I reminded him. But I'm learning. As dusk settled, fairy lights blinked on overhead and the reception shifted into full swing. My father pulled me onto the dance floor, insisting on one slow dance together. We swayed to the string quartet's rendition of a classic ballad, and I rested my head on his shoulder. Thank you for trusting me, I whispered. He kissed the top of my head. Always, he said. When the song ended, I slipped away to find my mother, Aunt Judy, and other relatives, who greeted me with hugs and laughter. The camaraderie felt genuine now, unforced. I realized that by facing drama instead of fleeing it, I had given my family a gift far greater than peace. One afternoon, I had reminded us why we belonged together. Later that night, back in my apartment, I sank onto my couch with a contented sigh. My phone buzzed with a photo from Emily, the first wedding portrait of the whole family, everyone smiling. My aunt and father stood side by side, arms around each other. I let the image settle in my mind, warmth blooming in my chest. I had paid my respects, yes, but more importantly, I had stayed. And in doing so, I had discovered the quiet power of presence, the beauty of listening, and the strength we find when we choose family over fear. As sleep pulled me under, I whispered to the empty room, no drama this time, truly. And for the first time, I believed it.